Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I am Dr. Muhammad Abdullah, and from today onward we are going to start a series of lecture about the epidemiology of communicable diseases. And today our first topic of discussion is poliomyelitis. So what is actually poliomyelitis? It is an acute viral infection. It's an acute viral infection, and it is actually the infection of human alimentary tract. But the virus can infect the CNS in about 0.5% of cases. So poliomyelitis is acute viral infection of human alimentary tract, but in 0.5% of cases the virus may infect or damage or affect the CNS, resulting in variable degree of paralysis and possibly leading to death. But it is possible, it is a risk, it is a chance. Okay. Now we'll proceed toward the epidemiology of this disease. Epidemiology. Actually, one thing you must clear in mind. You should clear in mind that whenever we discuss a disease in community medicine, we discuss it under following headings. First of all, we see it epidemiology. The second thing we see is the source of infection. The third thing we see is the reservoir of infection. The fourth thing we see is the mode of transmission. The fifth thing we see the portal of entry. So what we see, first we see epidemiology, source of infection, reservoir of infection, mode of transmission, and portal of entry of that infectious agent. Then what we see is the period of communicability. We see the incubation period. And then finally we discuss the pathogenesis, clinical feature of that disease, and then we discuss the treatment and immunization or prevention. So coming back to the lecture, we discuss first of all epidemiology, source of infection, reservoir of infection, mode of transmission, portal of entry, period of communicability, in incubation period, pathogenesis, clinical features, treatment, and immunization or prevention. So in the epidemiology we see two things: the distribution of this disease, and what are the determinants of this disease. So distribution, it means that who are the people who infect, the people or person, when, time, and place. So in distribution we see time, place, and person. So the person is actually 6 months to 3 years of age. The babies which are aged 6 months to 3 years are mainly infected. At the time it's mainly in the summer and rainy season, and also in late winters. And by place we mean the people living in a specific place are infected. So the place, any place which is having some risk factor like contaminated food and water, or excess of flies, large families, poor families. So these are actually the places. Any place with these risk factor will get infected by polio. Determinant is the polio virus. It is the main etiological factor. And the polio virus, remember, it is an RNA virus. So what we discussed in the heading of epidemiology, the distribution and determinants of the disease, our first heading. Then distribution, determinant. Distribution by mean time, place and person. The person 6 months to 3 year age children are babies. And time, place, time, summer, rainy season and late winters. Place, any place with some risk factor like flies and contaminated water and food. Large families and poor families are mainly infected. And the determinant is the poliovirus, which is an RNA virus. So source of infection is the feces and oropharyngeal secretions. These are the source of infection. Reservoir of infection is, this is very important. Man is the only reservoir. Man is the only reservoir. Source is feces and oropharyngeal secretions. Reservoir is man only. Mode of transmission is mainly through the contaminated fingers with feces, or contaminated milk and water, or through droplet infections. Remember always, contaminated fingers with the feces, contaminated milk, water, food, etc., fomites, and droplet infection. The portal of entry is GIT, that is ingestion through the mouth. So we have discussed epidemiology, source of infection, reservoir of infection, mode of transmission, and portal of entry. Then we come to the period of communicability. Period of communicability 7 to 13 days. Incubation period is 6 to 14 days. It is different in different books, remember always. This is the main topic. Pathogenesis, clinical features. These are the main topics which is the target of our today's discussion. All these epidemiology, source, reservoir, this is all the things of to be ratificated. But the main thing is the pathogenesis. This is very important. So we will give special stress on this topic. So stay with us. So welcome back. Pathogenesis. So let's consider this was a human being, although it is not a human being, and it was his pharynx. So actually my drawing is very poor. So this was a poor person who is going to be infected by poliovirus. So we consider his pharynx, okay, and then lower down the esophagus, and then is the GIT. So after ingestion, the poliovirus, after ingestion, the poliovirus start multiplicating in the mucosa of the oropharynx, as well as the mucosa of the intestinal mucosa. So it start multiplication of the oropharynx and intestinal mucosa. This is the first step. And what we called it is the phase 1. That it start multiplication in the oropharynx as well as in the intestinal mucosa. Then it proceeds toward the phase 2. And it enters the phase 2. So now what happens? The virus, after multiplicating the mucosa of oropharynx and in the intestinal mucosa, it enters the lymphatics. Where it enters? Lymphatics. It enters the lymphatics and enters the regional lymph nodes. And here it starts multiplication. Then after multiplication in the regional lymph node, it enters the blood. And here it causes transient viremia. And this transient viremia clinically manifests as febrile illness. This was all about phase 2. In the phase 1, it starts multiplication in the oropharynx and in the intestinal mucosa. Then in the phase 2, it enters the renal lymph node, enters the blood, causes viremia, which clinically manifests as febrile illness. Now it enters the phase 3. After phase 1, phase 2, it enters the phase 3. What happens in the phase 3? It starts multiplication in the reticuloendothelial cells, and here it continually multiplies. Remember one thing, it continually multiplies. So this multiplication continually supply the blood with virus and produces a persistence viremia. Remember one thing, in the phase 2, when it was multiplying in the lymph node, regional lymph node, and enter the blood, it was causing a transient viremia. Then it enters the phase 3, where it multiplies in the reticuloendothelial cells, reticuloendothelial system, and this multiplication is actually responsible for supplying blood with constant supply of virus, and this constant supply of virus causes persistent viremia. Remember always. So persistence viremia. Then it enters the neuronal transmission or through hematogenous transmission, and it enters the CNS. It enters the CNS. This is the main stage. Remember always, when it enters the CNS, what it do? It damages the spinal cord. Which cells? Anterior horn cell of the spinal cord, and this is mainly affected. It is 79% of the cases anterior horn cells are damaged, and this we called as spinal poliomyelitis. Spinal poliomyelitis. Then we ascend upward. When we ascend upward, it damages the pons medulla and midbrain. That is the brainstem. What we call is bulbar poliomyelitis. Bulbar poliomyelitis. So spinal poliomyelitis, bulbar poliomyelitis, and the bulbar poliomyelitis occurs 2% of the cases. And there is no specific name for the cerebellum when it gets damaged. And when the motor cortex is damaged, when the motor cortex get infected with the virus, we call it as encephalitic poliomyelitis. So these were the three actually the pathological types. Anterior horn cells are damaged, spinal poliomyelitis. Brainstem is damaged, bulbar poliomyelitis. Cerebellum, there is no specific name. And when the motor cortex is damaged, we call it as encephalitic poliomyelitis or encephalitic poliomyelitis. So now we will proceed toward the clinical features, which is another very important topic. So we will have